Good day to you. My name is Wolf Oberschulte, and today I will be talking about scope management. Scope management is an important element for the successful implementation of a project. Defining and changing the scope of the project is an ongoing project management activity. To achieve this, scope management must be introduced at the beginning and operated on a permanent basis. What is scope? Scope is the product of functionality and content. Not every function has to be offered to users in the same depth. Here is an example. Driving a car and getting from A to B can be done in a small car as well as in a luxury vehicle. In a small car, I can get in on small seats, drive at reasonable speeds in the city and in the country, park very well, transport small loads and cover short distances. In a luxury sports car, I have more seating space, more comfort and entertainment equipment, and can travel much faster on country roads and highways. For many everyday journeys in the local area, the small car can even be the more cost-effective solution. For long vacation trips, the luxury car with its many features may be the better solution in relation to the time spent in the vehicle. How a driving function is fulfilled can therefore vary. First of all, we come to the planning of the scope. The necessary functions and content of the software system are defined at the start of the project and planned according to dependencies and importance. In the next step, the necessary deliverables, also known as result categories, are defined. These are, for example, concepts, plans, specifications, and created software components. These artifacts are noted and the acceptances are coordinated. Who in the project or customer organization accepts the deliverables? The project is now starting and the requirements are being implemented. The scope of the project is constantly scrutinized and reviewed in the course of the project work to ensure that it meets requirements. What does this mean? In the course of the project, much of the content and the design and depth only become clear when working on the implementation. The specification brings details to light that could not have been clear beforehand. It also becomes clearer how complex implementation can be. This provides new insights into the effort, necessity of depth and priority for the customer. Here, time, effort, and quality can be controlled directly. As new requirements arise during the course of the project, for example due to gaps in the concept, new specifications from external influences, new user needs for test experiences, dealing with changes, called change requests, is an everyday task in project management. If the project team has to do a lot of new things, this will have an impact on the project work. Such change requests must therefore be decided by the client, who is responsible for the consequences in terms of scheduling, effort, and budget. In project management, new requirements and the change in scope must be made visible to the customer and those responsible. The consequences on the schedule and budget must be compared with the project objectives, and a decision must make the consequences visible. Clear instruments and information are necessary for the management of change requests. For various purposes, for example price development, the presentation of further content and open decisions, it is advisable to collect the CRs of a project in a list and to document the status of clarification and processing. This list must be visible to both the client and contractor in order to serve as a communication platform. This means that both partners have the same information and can coordinate decisions and further planning. In the presentation of the CRs, the content, significance, and importance, as well as the effort, costs, and impact on deadlines must be made visible. Here too, the answer to the question, what happens if we don't do it, can help to clarify the importance of the topic and which alternatives make sense. Strict CR management is absolutely essential, especially for contract types with high liabilities and responsibilities for the client, namely contracts for work, fixed prices, and fixed scopes. As mentioned in the chapter on contract types, contracts with high obligations and little freedom are those that shift more risk to the contractor, and therefore changing requirements in CR management must be strictly monitored. See this cube. The areas marked on it are green with little risk, yellow with more risk, and red with almost full responsibility for costs, scope, and quality for the contractor. The more fixed the variables of billing form, obligation or duty and scope are, the more it is necessary to react to changes and counterclaims. New requirements can also be negotiated quid pro quo or step by step against old ones. In the CR process, the effects, that is, the changes, must be presented and discussed in detail with all consequences. When a new requirement is implemented, the efforts, delays, costs, and contributions must be named and approved. This means that all those involved and affected must commit to the consequences and accept them. What does this look like in detail? The project team describes the change request specifically in terms of content, impact on budget, schedule, and personnel, as well as a proposal on how a decision should be made. The whole process is presented to an authorized decision-making level on the client and contractor side. This level is responsible for new budgets, time delays, or personnel decisions. These topics are often not within the mandate of the actual project management. A separate committee or body is often agreed for this purpose. With the CR described and the effects mentioned, these clients are informed and are responsible even if no decision is made. It is important to make it clear that every decision has consequences. It can also happen that the operational project management is given a framework of costs and time budget at its own disposal and can decide within this framework on its own authority, but reports on the results. Many such CRs can arise in the course of a project, so it is important to maintain an overview in communication and to have all information available in a compact form for later processes such as acceptance or invoicing. The CR list documents the name of the CR, what is it all about, the reference, in what context is the CR, in which function is this to be found, the background or reason, how did it come up and what happens if you don't have it, effort, person days in implementation and testing, the status of the vote, is it agreed or just written down but not decided, the status of implementation and next steps. It is important to categorize via the type, whether it is a new functionality, a new quality, for example, more complicated in execution than previously described, or changed framework conditions, for example, lack of provision. This list must be constantly maintained and kept up to date. It is used for financial control as a record of agreements and to quickly identify what has been agreed in addition to the scope. In every project, the situation arises that the calculated expenses and budgets are no longer met. In order to be active in this situation, scope management is a sensible measure. Program development cannot suddenly be accelerated. However, it can be questioned whether all the desired functions are required and whether the design needs to be so intensive or whether lesser standards can provide the same functionality. For example, date time picker from the library. The aim must be to discuss alternatives, create awareness, and thus allow easier solutions. Here again, the image of the possibilities of fulfilling driving a car functions should be mentioned. I can approach a cheap and a very comfortable solution. Both fulfill the same function of driving from A to B, but in different ways. Pursuing the project with the originally commissioned scope and not including new requirements, or, on the contrary, omitting unnecessary topics, is a success factor. Very few projects have failed because the scope was reduced. Therefore, the general rejection of new demands and thus also new work is a basic attitude that can help to reduce risks. What happens if we don't do it can serve as a thought pattern to clarify whether it is really necessary to include new functions or features immediately, or whether it is better to tackle them later when critical functions have been safely implemented. With this in mind, it is always important to reject many new requirements and only include necessary requirements, especially during the course of a project. This can also apply to requirements that have already been mentioned. The saying, "If you open the door to everyone, you'll let in a few drafts," makes it clear that difficult decisions also have to be made in project management. When considering the scope, it is important to scrutinize not only the functionality, but also its design. Functionality can be offered with elaborate and less elaborate options. For example, a date field can only be checked syntactically, or a date time picker can be offered in different versions. This design can save a lot of work or be necessary in order to support the user, or simply offer functions and expand them more conveniently at a later date. Once a requirement is included in the plan, it is difficult to reject it. Therefore, requirements management must be directly synchronized with project management. Even at this stage, a requirement must be examined for its importance and characteristics. Question the scope. The scope must be scrutinized by project management in order to be able to control the implementation. If functions are not implemented or are introduced later, this can significantly secure the project schedule and ensure that the important project goals are achieved. If this is not actively pursued by project management, it is very uncertain that other departments in the project will do so. Here too, it is important to be active and attentive. If a project gets into difficulties and the promised deadlines and expenses can no longer be realized, the first thing to discuss is the scope, or also the scope of services. Scopes must be reduced and a focus on the possibilities of implementation within the existing budget framework. That is, design to budget must be permitted as a mindset. It is necessary to find alternatives in order to simplify implementation and thus make the project goals more realistic. These are our lessons and recommendations for scope management. I hope I have been able to convey an impression and the findings from our projects. We welcome your suggestions and questions and thank you for your attention.